"You can stand there, Marion Camilla," said her voice clear, calm, and loud enough for the entire table to hear. "That statue says more about your role in this family than any seat ever could." I froze. There was no chair at the head of the dining table. Instead, where I'd always sat, where I had hosted Thanksgiving dinners, told stories, passed down recipes, blessed each child before their first turkey, now stood a tall, sleek, bronze statue of a faceless woman holding nothing in her outstretched palms. Her posture was regal, unmoving, cold. The brass plaque at the base read one word, etched in perfect serif font, legacy. If you've ever seen someone erased from their own family, replaced not with another person, but with a symbol, then stay with me through this story. And if you've ever witnessed something like this in your town, your church, your home, I ask you to write the name of your city in the comments below, because I need to know where else is this happening. And if you believe even for a moment that no woman deserves to be symbolized into silence, then subscribe. Because what happened that day wasn't the end. It was the opening shot. The statue was exactly my height. The same lean shoulders, the same lowered gaze. It was uncanny. Someone had modeled it deliberately. Someone had planned this. I turned slowly to the long table Thanksgiving dinner, 15 guests, 3 kinds of stuffing, and saw that everyone had taken their seats already. My grandkids, my nephews, my son, even my old neighbor Pete, who somehow made it onto Camilla's curated guest list. Everyone except me. My hands trembled just slightly, and I tried to hide it by gripping the back of the nearest chair. Camilla smiled sweetly and gestured toward the statue as if this whole scene were a surprise reveal on a lifestyle show. "We had her made this summer. Isn't she beautiful?" Beautiful. The bronze gleamed under the chandelier. The plate at the bottom caught the light and threw it directly onto my hands. My granddaughter Sophie looked up from her plate and said brightly, "That's Grandma, right? Mommy said it's her forever seat." No one corrected her. No one explained that Grandma was not in fact dead. I had hosted this dinner every year since 1991, even when my husband passed, even when my son moved out, even when I had the flu. I'd carved turkeys through tears and bronchitis, served pies while limping from knee surgery. Because it mattered. Because this table, this exact table, was the last structure holding the family together. And now I'd been edited out of it. Camilla stood at the far end of the table in a fitted ivory blouse, the kind that somehow never wrinkled, even after hours of hosting. She raised her glass. "Let us give thanks for where we came from and where we're going. We are all of us the living proof of what came before." There was polite clapping. My son David didn't look at me. I looked to the buffet sideboard, hoping maybe someone had left a seat for me there. Nothing. My tray was nowhere. Camilla caught my glance and said, still smiling, "Oh, Marion, don't worry. There's a chair set up for you in the sunroom, next to the space heater." I nodded. I didn't speak. She'd made me into a relic, and now she was sending me to storage. In the sunroom, there was one plate, one glass of water, and a small fold-out chair. The heater was buzzing faintly in the corner. It smelled like burnt dust. I sat down, slowly setting my purse on the floor beside me. I could still hear laughter from the dining room. Someone had started talking about their startup. Someone else was debating pie flavors. I could see my own reflection in the glass doors, a woman in her 70s, hands still graceful, spine still straight. I didn't look like a statue, but in that moment I understood I had been turned into one, a symbol, a silent gesture, a warning. I wasn't supposed to be part of the conversation anymore. I was meant to be admired, but from a distance, to represent something, not participate in it. This was no accident. I had always suspected Camilla didn't want me around, but this was more than disrespect. This was strategy. The statue, the plaque, the wording legacy, it all fit. It was her version of retirement, not legal, not financial, emotional, social. And no one had stopped her. My son, my flesh and blood, had said nothing. That's what burned the most. David had once built me a flower box in the 4th grade and carved for Mom forever on the side. Now he couldn't even offer me a folding chair at the real table. Halfway through dinner, Ethan, my oldest grandson, slipped into the sunroom and handed me a cup of cider. "You okay?" I nodded. "Who made the statue?" He hesitated. "Mum found this sculptor in Vermont. Said it was her vision for the family. She told everyone you were the inspiration, that you wanted something symbolic, something timeless." I stared at him. "She told people I asked for it." "Yeah," he said. "She made a whole speech about generational transition. Said you wanted to step back gracefully." I smiled tightly. "Is that what she said?" He nodded, but I didn't believe her. I took a sip of the cider and held his gaze. "Don't ever mistake silence for agreement, Ethan." He sat down beside me and whispered, "I can get you a chair at the table." "No," I said. "This is where she wants me. Let's see how long she thinks I'll stay here." Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I walked back into the dining room. The table was still messy wine glasses, crumbs, a few stray forks, but the statue stood untouched. I walked up to it, close. The brass plate at the base caught my eye again. Legacy. It wasn't just a label, it was a verdict. The longer I stared, the more I realized how many decisions had led to this moment. It wasn't the statue that hurt. It was the months, maybe years of quiet exclusion that built up to it. Camilla hadn't just replaced me in one night. She'd been rewriting my role little by little, asking me to rest, discouraging me from cooking, insisting I enjoy retirement, offering to handle the planning. I had mistaken her poise for politeness, but now I saw it clearly. She was removing me from the narrative one chapter at a time. And David, he was letting her, or worse, helping her. I pulled out the plaque from under the statue and turned it around. Then I unplugged the little spotlight Camilla had installed to shine directly on it. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for now, that would have to be enough. Have you ever been erased by your own family, not through confrontation, but through subtle rearrangements and smiling sabotage? Share your thoughts. In the comments, someone else out there may need to know they're not alone. But what I didn't realize yet was that the statue wasn't just meant to replace me. It was meant to warn me. The next morning, the house was too quiet, not peaceful, orchestrated. Camilla had always been precise, but something had shifted. Her movements were smoother. Her voice just slightly louder in the halls, as though the walls themselves were trained to listen only to her. I came down the stairs at 6:45, as I had every day since the house was built, and paused by the kitchen doorway. The coffee maker was already brewing. The table had been reset spotless with 6 place settings. 6, not 7, not with mine. Camilla stood by the stove pouring almond milk into a frothing pitcher. She was humming. The song, something jazzy I didn't recognize, and she didn't flinch when I walked in. "Morning," I said quietly. "Oh, good morning," she said without turning. "The coffee's made. David likes it strong now." I reached for the cabinet above the sink, where I kept my mug, the one with the faded painting of Lake Michigan, but it wasn't there. I checked the next shelf. Nothing. Then the next. "Looking for something?" Camilla asked, still not facing me. "My mug," I replied. "The one I've used every morning for 20 years. She finally turned, holding a new ceramic cup with gold lettering that read, "Kindness is quiet." I donated the older mugs last week. They were looking tired. I took the new mug, feeling its unfamiliar weight in my hand. "They weren't tired," I murmured. "They were mine." That was the beginning. Over the next week, little things began to disappear or change, like the house was molting, shedding me. The photo wall in the hallway, once filled with black and white pictures of my parents, my wedding baby David, on his first birthday, was rearranged. Camilla replaced half of them with minimalist framed quotes. "Progress starts with perspective. Be the anchor." Not the echo, and a black square that simply read, "Forward." My bedroom door, which had always stayed open to let the light in now, squeaked when opened too wide. One morning, it was closed entirely. When I asked David if he had shut it the night before, he said he hadn't touched it. My laundry, which I always folded myself, began arriving in my room already done, with notes attached, simplifying your week, see. The pantry lock was next. It was subtle. The knob on the downstairs pantry, where I kept holiday linens, preserves, and the extra cans of chickpeas David hated, but I loved, was replaced with a modern key lock. I discovered it on a Wednesday afternoon when I went to fetch the lemon marmalade I'd made in spring. Locked. When I asked about it, Camilla gave a soft laugh. Oh, that's just temporary. We're baby-proofing again. You know, just in case. Safety first. I nodded, but Ethan was 12. Sophie was 9. There hadn't been a toddler in the house for nearly a decade. And when I checked the garage storage, my backup shelf, my boxes were gone. The final straw came quietly, as most things did. I returned from my Tuesday morning walk to find my rocking chair, the one my husband built by hand when David was born, missing from the porch. In its place stood a glossy white ceramic planter with a fig tree inside. Tied around the stem was a ribbon that said "Rooted in Love." Camilla appeared in the doorway behind me, wiping her hands with a dish towel. "The chair was warping," she said. "I donated it to the church." I didn't approve that, I said sharply. She shrugged. "You weren't using it this week." "I used it Sunday." She tilted her head. "You sat for 5 minutes, Marion." I stared at her, waiting for the flicker of apology, of recognition, something human. It never came. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked the halls quietly, as I used to when David was young, when night feeds and teething turned time inside out. Back then, I felt like the soul of the house, its pulse. Now I felt like an intruder. In the hallway near the guest room, I noticed a small red light blinking at the baseboard. A motion sensor. Had that always been there? I moved slowly toward the corner and noticed something new. A digital panel beside the door, sleek lit, embedded into the wall. It wasn't there last month. They were upgrading the house. Without asking me. Without telling me. I leaned in and saw the words Zentra Smart Home Hub scrolling across the screen. Zentra. I'd heard the name. Camilla had mentioned it in passing, talking about automation and integration. But I hadn't realized it had already begun. The house was no longer just a home. It was a system, a network, and I wasn't in the loop. The next morning, my bedroom thermostat read 62 degrees. I adjusted it manually, or tried to, but it blinked red and reset. Camilla knocked on the door minutes later, smiling. "Oh, sorry, the system must have overridden your setting. We're optimizing energy usage during off-peak hours. Good for the environment, right?" I stared at her, and she didn't flinch. The house no longer answered to me. And when I tried to call the security company, the one I'd used for years, the number had changed. The contract had been transferred. My name was no longer on the file. When I asked David that evening, he rubbed the back of his neck and said Camilla took care of it. She's better at managing those details. She didn't tell me. I guess she didn't think it was a big deal. I looked at him for a long time. My son. My only child. "Not a big deal," I repeated. The air in the house shifted that week. It felt quieter, but not peacefully so. Sterile, like a place in transition, a building being staged. I began to wonder if I was still considered part of the household or part of its history. One afternoon, I found a paper on the printer. Camilla must have left it by accident. It was labeled Household Optimization, Phase 2. It included a list of recommendations. Archive all legacy possessions. Relocate redundant items to external storage. Centralize control of all environmental functions. Streamline household communications through one point of contact. At the bottom, a line caught my eye. Objective reduce confusion by minimizing generational overlap in authority. Generational overlap. They were describing me like I was a compatibility issue. Sometimes control doesn't arrive with a scream. It arrives with a clipboard, a calendar, a kind voice that says, "Don't worry, I've got it." Have you ever experienced this kind of takeover, not by force, but by removal? Not through confrontation, but through the slow subtraction of your place in the room? If so, I want to hear your story. Leave a comment below. Not just for me, but for the women who don't know how to name what's happening to them. Your words might be their mirror. I didn't know it then, but I was just one step away from being removed entirely. Not emotionally, not symbolically, legally. By the third week of December, I had stopped being invited to family outings. At first, I told myself it was the weather. It had been unusually wet for California that month, and I'd had a cough. I convinced myself that perhaps Camilla was simply being considerate, not wanting me to get sick. But when Sophie casually mentioned the zoo trip over dinner, and David added, "Oh, right, sorry, we didn't think you'd want to go," I felt the first real crack. No one had asked. They had gone without me. I turned to Ethan. "Did you have fun?" He glanced at Camilla, then back at his plate. It was okay. Cold. Camilla smiled over her wine glass. "You wouldn't have liked it, Marion. It was loud, crowded, a lot of stairs." I nodded. "So was Disneyland in 2007. I didn't sit that one out." She didn't respond. She just took another sip. That weekend, I asked Ethan to help me decorate the tree. It had been our tradition since he was 4, me holding the antique glass ornaments, him climbing the little stepladder we kept just for this purpose. He'd always said he liked the stories behind each one. The time I dropped the silver snowflake and cried. The one David painted as a child that somehow still smelled like glue. But when I knocked on his door and offered, he hesitated. "Mom already finished the tree," he said. "She got a new set of ornaments. White and gold. They all match." I paused. "Where's the old box? The ones we always used?" His shoulders slumped. "I don't know." She said they looked dusty. I stood there a moment longer, waiting for something, a smile, a shrug, an apology. But he didn't know what to do either. "I thought you'd ask me," I said softly. "I did," he replied. "But she said you were resting." I opened the hall closet later that night. The ornament box was gone. I found it 2 days later in the garage, shoved behind a stack of labeled plastic bins, marked Guest Winter and Seasonal Living. The top was slightly cracked. Inside, several of the glass ornaments were missing their hooks. 2 had shattered completely. The lid had a new label written in Camilla's handwriting, "Vintage to sort." To sort. Not to use, not to display. To sort. I held the broken snowflake in my palm and didn't cry. Not right away. But the weight of it, the fact that no one had thought to tell me to ask to include, felt heavier than the glass itself. A few days later, I tried to bake my cranberry scones. It was another tradition. Camilla had never liked them, said they were too rustic. But David always asked for them in December, and the grandkids used to eat them warm out of the oven with sticky hands and jam on their sleeves. But when I went to the pantry, I found a printed inventory list taped to the inside of the door. It was color-coded. Organic flour. Gluten-free flour. Almond flour. No regular white. The dried cranberries were gone, replaced with goji berries. When I turned to the spice rack, I found new jars uniformly labeled turmeric, smoked paprika, no cinnamon, no nutmeg. It was like someone had erased my entire flavor palette. I tried to ask Camilla where she had stored the old ingredients. She looked up from her phone and said I did a purge. We needed to standardize. "You didn't ask me," she smiled. "I assumed you'd be happy. It's cleaner now." Cleaner? I looked around the kitchen, not just cleaner. Sanitized, streamlined, cold. I had built this kitchen, paid for every tile, every appliance, and yet now I didn't recognize it. That night, when David came home from work, I asked him plainly, "Do you notice what's happening?" He furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm being slowly replaced. Not with people. With systems. With new habits. With silence." He exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Camilla's just trying to organize things. She's good at that." "She's erasing me, David." His face tightened. "Mom, that's not fair." "Is it unfair?" I asked quietly, to say I feel like a guest in my own home. He didn't answer. I tried to call my friend Judith. We used to have coffee every Thursday, but her number was no longer in my contacts. My phone had synced to the new household account Camilla had set up, and somehow my old backups had vanished. When I asked Ethan if he remembered her number, he shook his head. "Who's Judith?" It hit me. Then she was already gone from his memory. I wasn't just being shut out of the present, I was being cut out of the past. I began to question my own memory. One afternoon, I went to retrieve the birthday photo album from 2003, Sophie's first cake, Ethan's frosting face, and couldn't find it on the shelf. I looked in the linen closet in my nightstand, even under the guest bed. When I finally asked Camilla, she said, "Are you sure you didn't already donate that one?" I blinked. "Why would I donate our family albums?" She shrugged. "You've been mentioning decluttering. Maybe you forgot." I hadn't. But for the first time, I wondered if I might be wrong. Maybe I had said something. Maybe I had misplaced it. That seed of doubt, so small, so subtle, began to grow. Had I really forgotten? Was I misremembering? Or was I being made to doubt? Some nights, I lay in bed and replayed entire conversations trying to pinpoint when the shift began. Was it after Thanksgiving? After the statue before? There were no clear answers. Just shadows of certainty fading under brighter, colder light. One evening, I went to brush my teeth and found a new electric toothbrush in place of my old manual one. It had my name on it, engraved even. M. Whitmore. But I never asked for it. When I told Camilla I preferred my old brush, she laughed gently and said, "You told me last week you wanted an upgrade." I hadn't. Or had I? I opened the drawer under the sink. My old brush was gone. Have you ever been made to question your own memory, not through arguments, but through a steady rearrangement of your life, until you're no longer sure what's yours? Sometimes, the most devastating kind of isolation isn't physical. It's the quiet dismantling of your authority over your own reality. I don't share this to complain. I share it because someone watching might be in the middle of the same storm and not even realize it. If you've lived through this, or you're living through it now, I hope you'll write in the comments. Not for me. For the next woman wondering why the walls feel different. One night I heard Sophie whispering outside my door. "She sleeps a lot now," she said. "Mum says it's what old people do." Then silence, then giggles, then the door closing softly. I was still awake. I wasn't sleeping more. I was just no longer invited to be awake with them. I thought I was disappearing. But then, one afternoon, I heard something from the kitchen, something that stopped my breath mid-air. A conversation not meant for me. A word I was never supposed to hear. And just like that, everything changed. It started with a calendar invitation I hadn't made. A small notification on my phone, which now synced automatically with the household system Camilla managed, flashed across the screen at 8:14 a.m. Neuropsychological Wellness Assessment. Tuesday at 11:00 a.m. Dr. Henry Fornell, Walnut Creek. I blinked at it, confused. I hadn't scheduled any appointments. I didn't even know who Dr. Fornell was. Camilla passed behind me in the hallway, sipping green juice from a tall glass. "Oh, good, you saw it," she said, without slowing down. "It's all booked. I'll drive you." I turned. "Excuse me." She paused at the staircase. "The memory clinic. You mentioned some trouble with names last week. Remember, I thought it'd be good to get a baseline, just in case." I stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or scream. "I said I forgot where I left my reading glasses," I replied. She smiled. "Exactly. That's how it starts." David agreed. He said it gently that night over dinner after the kids had gone upstairs. "It's just precautionary, Mum. Lots of people your age do this. It's part of being proactive. I don't need a cognitive test." He reached for his water. "But what's the harm in having one? If it confirms everything's fine, great." I looked at him, really looked. "And if it doesn't?" He hesitated. Camilla reached for his hand across the table. "Then we have a plan. That's what families do." I went. Not because I wanted to, but because saying no felt like proving their point. The clinic was sleek minimalist. White walls, no clocks, filtered water in glass carafes. I signed a digital form I hadn't read in full. The receptionist smiled in that way people do when they've already been briefed. Dr. Fornell was kind, middle-aged, silver beard, soft voice. He asked me to draw a clock. He asked me to remember 5 words. He asked me to name animals that began with C. After 45 minutes, he said he wanted to run a few more assessments. When I asked for a copy of my paperwork, he blinked. You don't already have the release forms, he asked. Release for what? He glanced at his clipboard. We received documents authorizing your family to receive the results directly. I hadn't signed anything, or I thought I hadn't. That night, I tore through the kitchen junk drawer and found it a folded printout labeled Health Coordination Waiver, Adult Dependent. My signature was at the bottom, or something that looked like it. The pen stroke on the M of my name was wrong. 3 days later, I woke up to find my medications had been changed. Same bottles, same labels, but the pills were different. One was rounder. Another had a split line that hadn't been there before. I called the pharmacy. The technician looked up my records and read the list aloud. 2 of the drugs were new, prescribed by Dr. Fornell. Wait, I interrupted. He's a neuropsychologist. He doesn't prescribe medication. There was a pause. Oh, the technician said. You're right. It says the prescription was sent in by proxy through a family caregiver. I hung up, my breath shallow, my hand trembling. I hadn't agreed to anything. That night, I said nothing. I watched the family eat dinner. I listened to Sophie talk about her upcoming recital. I watched Ethan scroll through something under the table, nodding along with half an ear. David poured Camilla more wine. She laughed at something he whispered. I realized I had become an audience member in my own home. My presence was tolerated, not required. My opinion now framed as confusion. 2 days later, the housekeeper arrived early. Her name was Miriam. She had worked for us on and off for 15 years. She pulled me aside in the laundry room and said quietly, I thought you should know she had me box up all your clothes yesterday. I stared. Box them. She told me you were transitioning to assisted living, that the rooms needed to be cleared. I blinked. I'm not going anywhere. Miriam hesitated. I didn't think so. That's why I didn't take them. Where are they? In the garage. Behind the shelving. She told me not to mention it. I walked straight there, past the freezer, past the holiday decor. And there they were, 3 large cardboard boxes labeled MNUB to donate. They weren't just my clothes. They were my wedding album, my recipe books, my journals. Camilla had packed up my life before I had finished living it. There's a kind of shock that doesn't scream. It just sinks, deep, heavy, and quiet. I sat on the edge of the garage steps and opened one of the boxes. Inside my red wool coat was folded neatly the one David had bought me the year he got his first bonus. Pinned to the collar was a small note, a little outdated but charming. Her handwriting. Camilla's. When I walked back inside, Miriam was wiping the counter. She paused and said, You should check the file cabinet upstairs, the one in the linen closet. I think something's wrong. Why? Because last week she had me shred a stack of papers, and one of them had your name on the title line. It was thick, legal-looking. She said it was a duplicate, but she trailed off. She waited until you were out. I didn't speak. I walked to the upstairs hall, opened the linen closet, and reached behind the towels. The file cabinet was locked. It had never been locked before. I stood there, hand on the handle, heart pounding. I wasn't just being boxed away. I was being erased. But this time, I wasn't going to sit quietly in the sunroom and sip cider while my life disappeared around me. Have you ever felt the ground shift underneath you, not in a moment of explosion, but in a series of small, deliberate moves that leave you questioning whether you're paranoid or finally awake? Sometimes it takes the voice of someone outside the circle to snap you out of the fog. Have you ever had a housekeeper, a stranger, a nurse, or even a clerk say something that revealed a truth your family was hiding? If so, say it. Put it in the comments. There are more of us out here than anyone admits. From that moment on, I stopped assuming good intentions. I began writing everything down. I photographed the pill bottles. I made copies of every document I could find. I bought a small voice recorder from the pharmacy down the street. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt alert. Not afraid. Not yet. Because if Camilla had gone this far already, what was she planning next? The first real proof came by accident. It was a Tuesday morning. Camilla had left in a hurry, muttering something about a committee brunch. David was already at work. The house was quiet, except for the rhythmic spin of the washing machine in the garage. I had gone looking for a pen. That's all. The junk drawer in the kitchen, the one that used to be mine, had been streamlined. Camilla kept it locked, now calling it a safety drawer. But she'd left the key on the counter by mistake. I turned the lock, half expecting nothing but batteries and zip ties. Instead, I found a thick envelope. On the front, written in her neat, slanted script, pending. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a printed draft of an email titled Conservatorship Initial Inquiry Subject, Marion Whitmore. The second was a notarized letter, unsigned, unfiled, prepared by a law firm I didn't recognize. It stated that I had expressed confusion about my surroundings and willingly relinquished daily household management due to cognitive strain. I hadn't done either of those things. I dropped the papers on the kitchen island and sat down. This wasn't just strategy anymore. This was a plan. That afternoon, I called the pharmacy again. This time, I asked them to resend every refill record from the past 3 months. The young man on the line was polite, but hesitant. I'd have to speak with the authorized contact, he said. You're speaking to her, I said flatly. He asked for my date of birth. I gave it. Then my insurance number. Then the name of my last prescribing doctor. There was a pause. Then he said, there are 2 profiles under your name. One updated, one legacy. Legacy. That word again. Later that week, I visited my old friend Lorraine at the church library. She'd been a legal assistant for 20 years before retiring. I asked if she knew anything about fictitious guardianship claims. She raised an eyebrow. Why? I didn't tell her everything, just enough. She leaned in. It's more common than you think, especially when there's property involved, or inheritance. I nodded slowly. You need to get ahead of it, she said. I began writing everything down, every strange comment, every forgotten appointment, every moment that felt off. And then one night, I left my phone on record during dinner. It sat in my cardigan pocket, as Camilla explained to David that she'd moved the home Wi-Fi access to a password-protected network because Mum was clicking on too many spam links again. I hadn't touched my laptop in weeks. Later, I played the recording back in my room. Her tone was light, reasonable, entirely false. That night, I bought a second recorder. One small enough to slide behind the bookshelf in the family room. Within 2 days, it captured something else. David asking Camilla if they were going too far, and Camilla responding, it's either we act now or we wait until she burns the house down trying to boil water. That same week, I called my old financial planner, Mr. Connolly. He was semi-retired, but answered immediately when he heard my name. I've been wondering about you, he said. I got a call last month from someone claiming to be your power of attorney. My stomach dropped. They said they were updating your trust documents, he continued, but something felt off. I asked them to send written confirmation with your signature. Never received it. Who called, I asked, though I already knew. He paused. A woman. Polite. Said she was your primary caregiver. I thanked him. Hung up and cried in the pantry for 10 minutes. I thought I was prepared, but nothing braced me for what I found next. Camilla had been using an old email of mine, one I hadn't logged into in years, to send correspondence in my name. She'd recovered the password, changed the recovery options, and had been forwarding my messages to lawyers, banks, and even David. One of them read, I'm feeling overwhelmed lately. Camilla has been so helpful. I'm glad she's making more decisions. She understands me better than I understand myself. My name was typed at the bottom, but I had never written those words. At first I wanted to confront her, to throw every page of evidence onto the dinner table and demand answers. But Lorraine's voice echoed in my mind, get ahead of it. Not even, get beneath it. Build the case, then strike once. So I waited, watched, listened. And then something unexpected happened. Miriam, our housekeeper, came to me one evening, fidgeting with her sleeves. I overheard something she said. Yesterday. I wasn't going to say anything, but I didn't breathe. She was on the phone. I was folding towels by the linen closet. She told someone, once the trust revocation letter is filed, the rest is just optics. Did she say who she was talking to? No, but she said your name and the words, final phase. That night, I went to the garage again, the same place where she had hidden my boxes. I climbed onto the old storage stool and reached above the shelves. They're tucked inside a nondescript banker's box labeled Holiday Wreaths, I found it. A red accordion file. Inside, signed papers. Copies of communication with an elder care lawyer. Drafts of a living will I'd never seen. And at the bottom, a full inventory of the home's assets. Every room. Every piece of furniture. Every account. All logged. All prepared. There's a moment when fear transforms. When it becomes focus. Because when you know the person smiling at you is holding a knife behind their back, you stop begging for kindness. You start planning escape. If you had undeniable proof that someone was orchestrating your erasure, not with rage, but with strategy, what would you do? Would you act now or wait until the timing was perfect? There's no easy answer. But I ask because I need to hear how others would handle it. Say it in the comments. Your instinct may help someone else trust their own. I was building my case, every day stronger. But what I didn't see not yet was how fast Camilla was moving. She wasn't waiting. She was accelerating. And soon she would do something that even I wasn't prepared for. I was 5 the first time I watched my mother throw a plate across the kitchen. It missed my head by an inch and shattered against the pantry door. She didn't apologize. She never did. She just stared at me and said, if you weren't so slow, I wouldn't have to yell. I believed her. That's the problem with being a child. You think cruelty is your fault. I grew up measuring silence like weather. Some mornings were dry, short-cutting remarks about my clothes or my posture. Others were storms, slammed doors, screaming the unmistakable crack of something being broken downstairs while I curled up and pretended to be asleep. There were no I love you-s. No apologies, no safety, only conditions. You earn rest when your room is spotless. You earn kindness when you don't complain. You earn affection when you don't cry. By 15, I had taught myself how to be invisible. By 18, I had taught myself how to smile through blood in my mouth. By 22, I knew exactly what kind of mother I didn't want to become. And yet, by 24, I had married into a family that looked eerily like the one I came from, only with better lighting, better cookware, and more polite cruelty. Marion didn't hit. She didn't scream. She just existed so loudly that there was no room left for me. When David and I first moved in after the wedding just for 6 months, while we saved for the down payment, he said I thought we were equals in his mother's home. But it became clear within a week that Marion didn't see me as a daughter-in-law. She saw me as a visitor. She would knock before entering our room, but she'd always have a reason to enter. She would cook dinner for the whole family and then say, "Oh, Camilla, you don't need to bring anything. You've had a long day." It sounded kind. It wasn't. It was a message. This is still my kitchen, my home, my son. David didn't notice. Not at first. He'd grown up in that house with that kind of mother. He thought it was normal. He thought her weekly laundry folding was helpful. He thought her reminder texts about dentist appointments were sweet. He didn't see the way she undermined me in front of the kids, the way she said, "That's not how I would do it." But every mother has her own style. He didn't hear the sharpness in her tone when she said, "You'll figure it out someday." I did figure it out. Not motherhood, not marriage, but her. I figured out that Marion would never hand over control, not willingly. She wasn't cruel the way my own mother was, but she was just as possessive. She wore her grief like armor, the loss of her husband, the empty nest, and wrapped herself in tradition like a cloak that could shield her from change. But I wasn't her project, and this wasn't her house anymore. So I started reclaiming space. One drawer, one shelf, one holiday. I began with the pantry, then the decor, then the calendar. Slowly, I rewrote the narrative. I introduced systems, color-coded bins, digital reminders, coordinated themes. Marion hated all of it, but she didn't say so. Not outright. She made passive remarks, smiled through gritted teeth, but I saw her resentment, and I knew she would never step aside. She would never say, "I trust you with this family." So I stopped waiting for permission. Replacing her chair with the statue wasn't just a decision, it was a declaration. A new regime? And it worked. She didn't fight it. She stood there in that cream cardigan, trembling just slightly, and walked to the sunroom like a ghost sent to her corner. She thought it was temporary. It wasn't. The deeper truth is this: I don't feel guilty. Not for the locks, not for the emails, not for the rebranding of her bedroom as Guest West. I'm not doing this because I hate her. I'm doing this because women like her take up space for decades and then gasp when the oxygen gets redistributed. I'm not trying to erase her. I'm trying to protect what I've built. David, the kids this home, they function better under structure. Stability, clean lines, quiet mornings. Marion brought noise. She brought confusion, uncertainty. That couldn't continue. I once told my therapist years ago, when I still believed healing was a thing people could choose, that I felt like a bridge between two generations of broken women. She said, "Then you get to decide who walks across you and who doesn't." I never forgot that. Now I manage the finances. I oversee the documents. I've initiated the process. Yes, there's paperwork, but most of it's already done. The letter of revocation, the updated trust allocations, the conservatorship inquiry. She doesn't know it yet, but soon she won't be able to access a single login without my consent. The systems are in place. The timeline is set. There's one more form to file. And then this whole house will run the way it was always meant to, smoothly, quietly, without friction. Do you believe that past trauma gives someone the right to become controlling? Or is there a line, a point where sympathy ends and accountability begins? I ask because I want to hear your thoughts. Not all pain justifies action, but not all cruelty begins without reason. If you've lived through anything like this, I hope you'll share what it taught you. I know I'm not the only one who learned how to survive by taking control. Tomorrow, I'm filing the declaration. By the time Marion realizes what's happened, it will be finished. She's still holding on to pieces, photos, pills, words, but I'm not worried, because I always finish what I start, and this time I'll end it before she even knows it began. Her name was Denise Ralston. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a year, not since her husband passed, and she moved into the smaller unit down the street. We'd been acquaintances more than friends. The kind of neighbor who lends you an egg or watches your hydrangeas when you're out of town. But that afternoon, I found a handwritten note slipped under the front door. No return address, no phone number. Just a folded piece of paper that read, "Marion, I think we need to talk. It's about Camilla." It was signed DR. We met the next morning on the walking trail by the canal. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, as if we were fugitives from something other than our own children. She didn't waste time. I overheard something she said, adjusting her scarf. Camilla had coffee last week with my niece. They were discussing estate strategy. Camilla didn't know she was my niece. I listened in silence. She said you'd been slipping mentally, that soon you'd be declared unfit. And once that happened, there'd be no delays in reallocating primary control of the household trust. I nodded slowly. She's already changed passwords, documents, medications. Denise didn't look shocked, only sad. She said you wouldn't know what hit you, that you'd hand over everything thinking it was your own idea. I sat down on the bench beside the canal, heart thudding. Denise pulled something from her coat, a tiny black USB stick. My niece works in IT. She recorded the conversation by accident. She uses a smart pen during meetings. Picked up the whole thing. Does she know I'm listening to this? She gave me permission. Said if someone's doing this to their mother-in-law, they deserve to be stopped. That night, I listened to the file. I heard Camilla laugh, that smooth, polished voice, as she described phasing out my roles in the family. I've already cleared the social space, she said. Now I'm just making sure the legal side follows. She even described the statue, called it symbolic compliance, as if I had agreed to my own erasure. The next day I returned to the storage boxes in the garage. I pulled out everything I had, The forged documents, the pharmacy records, the voice recordings, the duplicated emails. And now the USB file. I bought a binder, labeled it Sequence. It was no longer just evidence. It was a case. But I needed more, so I called in a favor. Claire Mitchell had once worked with me at the county office 30 years ago. She was now a notary and legal transcriptionist. Still sharp, still discreet. We met in her car, parked outside the library. I handed her the binder. She read in silence for almost 20 minutes before speaking. "This isn't just suspicious," she said. "This is actionable. You're being positioned." "For what?" She looked at me. "To lose control of everything." She helped me scan and secure the documents. We created duplicates, stored backups, online printed summaries. She even drafted a timeline of behavioral changes, annotated with dates and witness notes. "This isn't paranoia, Marion," she said. "This is a coordinated transfer of power." I wasn't alone anymore. That realization, as subtle as it was, changed everything. For months, I had questioned my own sanity, wondered if I was being too sensitive, too proud, too old-fashioned. But now, I had voices outside the house, confirming what I had suspected all along. I was being pushed out quietly with a smile. Have you ever had someone outside your own family be the first to believe you? Sometimes the truth doesn't come from those closest to us. It arrives from a neighbor, a co-worker, a quiet voice on the edge of the scene who says, "You're not crazy." If you've ever been saved even partially by someone unexpected, share it. Leave a comment below, because maybe someone out there is waiting for permission to trust their gut again. Denise kept checking in. Claire kept organizing the file. I kept recording. Then 2 days later, Camilla made a mistake. A big one. She handed Ethan an envelope to take to school. He dropped it by the door as he left. I found it an hour later, opened unsealed by accident. Inside was a printed letter addressed to the school's administration. It stated that Marion Whitmore Me was no longer authorized to pick up Sophie or Ethan from campus due to emerging cognitive concerns and transitions in guardianship. There was no guardianship, no legal filing, just a letter preemptive, polished false, signed Camilla Whitmore, household manager. That afternoon, I put on my pearl earrings, the ones David gave me the year he graduated law school. I brushed my hair, wore my best coat, and walked straight to the office of a woman I hadn't seen in years. Her name was Catherine Reed. She had once been our estate attorney, and she owed me a favor. I placed the binder on her desk and said, "I need you to look through this." She did, silently, page after page. Her brow furrowed, her eyes narrowed. She closed it slowly, then said, "You're going to need more than just defense." "I know. You're going to need to go public." I nodded. For once, I said Camilla doesn't get to control the narrative. Because now I had people, and it was my turn to speak. The invitation was printed on thick ivory cardstock. "Spring renewal dinner family only," it read. Hosted by Camilla and David Whitmore. No mention of me, but I was expected to be there. That much was clear. The table would be set. The statue would be polished. The wine would be poured. And I would be seated, if at all, somewhere near the window, preferably out of earshot. But not this time. This time I was not coming as a ghost. This time I had the file. The dining room glowed with soft light when I arrived 10 minutes early. Camilla looked up from the centerpiece's perfectly symmetrical tulip arrangements in glass cylinders and paused. "You're early," she said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "So are you," I replied. "Must be nervous." She tilted her head. "About what?" I didn't answer. I simply walked to the sideboard, removed the decorative tray that covered the silver keyhole, and opened the drawer underneath. Inside, exactly where she kept them, were the printed place cards, each one typed in the same elegant font. David, Ethan, Sophie, Camilla, Legacy. I lifted the last one. No chair assigned to it, just the statue. I looked back at her. Not tonight. Then I slid the statue aside and placed my own chair at the head of the table. The guests arrived slowly. David, first wearing his usual grey sport coat, looking tired. Then the kids. Then Pete and his wife, Margaret. Even Miriam, the housekeeper, had been invited, Camilla's gesture of extended family. I watched them all settle in, chatting, smiling. Camilla rang her signature dinner bell. The room hushed. "I want to welcome everyone," she began. "This year has been about growth, about clarity, about aligning our lives with purpose." She glanced at me briefly, then away. "I want to take a moment to celebrate where we're headed." I stood before she could continue. "Actually, I'd like to say something." The room shifted. Chairs creaked, forks stilled. David gave me a cautious look. "Mom, maybe?" "No," I said gently. "I won't be long." I walked to the center of the table and placed the thick binder onto the mahogany surface. "Some of you may not know this," I began. "But over the past few months, there's been a quiet effort to remove me from this family, not through words, not through arguments, but through silence, through systems." I opened the binder. This is a record of what's been done in my name. Emails I didn't send, documents I didn't sign, conversations recorded by people who didn't know I'd ever hear them. Camilla stood. "Marion." I raised my hand. "I'm speaking." I passed the USB recorder to Pete. "Would you play this, please?" He hesitated, then inserted it into the speaker base on the buffet. Camilla's voice filled the room. "I've already cleared the social space. Now I'm just making sure the legal side follows. Then she won't know what hit her. She'll think it was her own idea." When the recording stopped, the silence was no longer soft. It was stunned. David's eyes were fixed on the table. Sophie blinked in confusion. Ethan looked directly at Camilla. "Is that real?" he asked. Camilla didn't answer. So I did. Yes. I walked around the table slowly. She created duplicate documents, rewrote access credentials, tried to file letters with the school declaring I was no longer fit to pick you up. She boxed my belongings, erased my passwords, even began drafting control over the trust without my knowledge. David whispered, "No, that can't be right." I handed him the signed letter from the fake guardianship inquiry. "Recognize that." He read it. His face went pale. "I never saw this," he said. Camilla spoke then. Finally. "I did it for stability," she said. "For everyone's peace of mind. You know how scattered things have been, how easily things fall through the cracks." I turned to her. "You mean how I remembered the birthdays? Paid the utility bills, drove the kids to practice." "That's not what I meant," she said. "No, you meant control, and you almost had it." I sat down slowly. "You treated me like a problem to be managed, not a person to be respected." I looked around the table. If any of you have ever watched someone be rewritten bit by bit behind the scenes, you'll understand why I didn't scream, why I waited, why I built this case like a quiet fire. I turned back to Camilla. "You took my seat at the table, so I took the truth. If you were at this dinner, where would you stand? With the woman who planned everything, or the one who waited silently building her defense until the time was right? I ask, because I know how blurry these situations can be. Truth isn't always clean. But tonight the evidence speaks. If this were your family, what would you do? Let me know in the comments. I'm truly listening." David stood up. His voice was quiet. "I need time." Camilla reached for his hand. He didn't take it. Pete cleared his throat. "I think maybe we should all take a break." People began to rise. Chairs pushed back. Plates untouched. No one made eye contact, except Ethan. He gave me a nod. "And Miriam," she mouthed the words, "I'm proud of you." But the biggest shock hadn't been revealed yet. Not to them. Not even to Camilla. Only I knew what was coming, and it was going to be public, official, and irreversible. The appointment was set for 2:00 p.m. sharp. Catherine Reed met me outside her office with 2 copies of the file in her arms and a determined expression I hadn't seen since the time we fought off a predatory property developer trying to gut our neighborhood park back in the early 2000s. We weren't alone. David had agreed to meet us there. I didn't know if he came out of obligation or guilt, but he came. Camilla arrived late. Of course she did. Dressed in navy with a leather folio in hand, she breezed into the conference room, as if this were just another school board meeting. She kissed David on the cheek, sat down across from me, and folded her hands neatly on the table. Catherine didn't waste time. I've reviewed all submitted documentation, she began, including materials provided by both parties. Before we begin, I'd like to clarify that what's at stake here is not merely a disagreement of household roles, it is a potential violation of California's elder abuse and exploitation statutes, specifically Penal Code Section 368 and elements under the California Welfare and Institutions, Code Section 15610. Third, Camilla blinked. David shifted in his seat. Catherine continued, her voice calm but cutting. Let's begin with the forged correspondence. Mrs. Whitmore Marion has provided printed emails accompanied by header metadata indicating that emails were sent from her address without her authorization. These emails contained statements relinquishing control over household decisions and finances, which were then used to justify power shifts within the home. She turned to Camilla. Do you deny sending these emails? Camilla smoothed a wrinkle in her skirt. They were drafts, suggestions. I never submitted anything official. Catherine pulled out a hard copy. This was forwarded to the estate accountant in March, accompanied by a notarized letter signed electronically under Marion's name. Camilla didn't speak. David cleared his throat. You signed Mom's name. I thought it would streamline things, she said, her voice faltering. It wasn't meant to be permanent. We needed structure, consistency. Catherine placed a second document on the table. This is a draft revocation letter for the original family trust, designating a new primary agent. It was never filed, thanks to the hesitation of the financial planner involved. But the intent is clear. Camilla's voice rose a pitch. It wasn't abuse, it was efficiency. She needed help. Catherine folded her hands. Under California law, isolating an elder from access to finances, family members, or property while gaining control of those resources constitutes financial abuse, regardless of intent. David leaned back, hands over his mouth. The room was still. Then Catherine delivered the blow. I've also reviewed the unauthorized prescriptions submitted under Mrs. Whitmore's name. A report has been filed with the California Department of Public Health and forwarded to Adult Protective Services for investigation. Camilla's composure cracked. You're blowing this out of proportion. David stood up. No, you're not, he said to Catherine. You're doing what I should have done months ago. He turned to Camilla, his voice low. You used my trust to carry this out. You made me part of it. Camilla's face twisted. I did this for you. For us. She was getting worse. No, he said. She was getting quieter. Because we weren't listening. I hadn't spoken since the meeting began. Now I did. Do you know the worst part, Camilla? She looked at me hollow now. You didn't take away my seat at the table. You made everyone believe I'd left it on my own. There was a long silence. Catherine spoke again calmly. We'll be moving forward with protective filing to secure Mrs. Whitmore's access to her own account's communication systems and property. She will be reinstated as the sole legal owner of her personal effects and retained decision-maker on all trust matters. Additionally, we will proceed with a cease and desist letter for impersonation and unauthorized medical coordination. Camilla stared at the table. I'll contest it, she whispered. You're welcome to, Catherine said. But I suggest you seek your own counsel. This office no longer recognizes your legal standing. Outside, as David and I stood in the parking lot, he finally turned to me. I'm sorry, he said. I nodded. You believed her. I didn't want to see it. I looked up at him. Don't make that mistake again. Have you ever watched someone cross a line so far that no apology could pull them back? And if justice finally caught up with them, would you feel relief or emptiness, I ask? Because I'm still unsure what this feeling is. If you were in my place, would this legal reversal feel fair or not enough? Please tell me in the comments. I think some of us need to hear where the line is and when it should be drawn. David offered to drive me home. I said no. I wanted to walk. It had been a long time since I moved through the world without wondering who was watching, who was listening, who was waiting for me to fail. That afternoon, for the first time in years, I opened the gate to my own front yard and heard nothing but the wind in the birch leaves. I didn't need vengeance. I didn't want Camilla punished. I just wanted to live in a house that didn't whisper to me in someone else's voice. And tomorrow I would begin reclaiming it, not with a battle, but with a breath. The first thing I did was reclaim the kitchen, not by announcing it, not with speeches. I simply rose early one Saturday, tied my apron the way I always had opened the windows, and started baking. The smell of cinnamon and butter filled the house before anyone else was awake. When Ethan walked in, rubbing his eyes, he paused in the doorway and said quietly, "You made the scones." I nodded without turning. He sat at the counter and waited. No phone, no music. Just the two of us, and a plate of warm, imperfect scones, the kind that fall apart in your hands. The kind you remember. Camilla didn't come downstairs that morning, and for once no one noticed. A week later, I hosted my own birthday. Not a surprise party, not a forced brunch. I sent out handwritten invitations. I set the table, the entire table, with the old linens David's grandmother had embroidered, the ones Camilla once said were too busy for a modern home. I used the silverware we hadn't touched in 10 years. People came, neighbors, old co-workers, Miriam, of course, Denise, Claire, even Pete and Margaret, who brought a lemon tart and said we missed this. David arrived last, holding a bouquet of gardenias and looking like a man who had walked through a thunderstorm without an umbrella. He kissed my cheek and whispered, "I'm proud of you." I didn't need that, but I took it anyway, because we all need to hear it sometimes. Camilla did not attend, but she did leave a note on the hall table. It was short. "I'll be staying with my sister for a while. Please tell the kids I'll call them soon." There was no apology, no signature, just absence. And for once it felt like a gift. I joined a writing group that spring. 6 women over 60 each of us, with a voice that had been ignored for far too long. We met every Thursday in the community library. We told stories, not about revenge, about return, about rebuilding, about reclaiming rooms in homes and in ourselves that we had once surrendered. Sophie brought me a drawing a month later. It was a crayon version of our house with 3 windows and a bright red front door. At the table inside sat a woman with grey hair and a big smile. There was no statue. There was no label that read legacy. Only a handwritten caption at the bottom that said, "Grandma is here." One afternoon, I stood at the edge of the garden and watched the birch trees sway in the wind. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove I belonged here. I just belonged. Have you ever seen someone go from forgotten to unforgettable? Someone who was cast aside and then returned stronger, not to punish, but to simply exist in full light again. If you've witnessed a story like that, or lived it yourself, I hope you'll share it in the comments. Some people out there may be holding their breath, waiting to believe that a quiet comeback is still possible. Your voice might be the one that gives them permission. I don't want revenge stories anymore. I want stories of reclamation, of slow mornings and warm scones and handwritten invitations, of homes where no one is erased, only rediscovered. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, real, human, difficult, but honest, I hope you'll subscribe. Because we're just getting started, and there are so many more voices waiting to be heard.